Know your place. Your family eats because of me. My boss yelled, denying my promotion, so I signed a better offer, quit, and watched HR escort her out. Hey, Reddit. I'm Ronnie, 41 male, and I didn't plan a career in data centers. I just kept saying yes to the ugly hours, and somehow that turned into a job title. 15 years ago, I was a night shift NOC tech at a regional ISP in Phoenix, staring at blinking dashboards and hoping nothing lit up red. Then a cooling unit died in the primary cage. Everyone else was blowing up the on-call manager, who'd conveniently missed his phone. So I handled it, kept the racks from overheating, and got everything stable before sunrise. The client never even knew. The next morning, my manager pulled me aside and hit me with the line that stuck: "Uptime isn't about being a hero. It's about making sure nobody ever needs one." That became my whole mindset. Stability, redundancy, change control, the boring stuff that keeps the lights on so everyone else can act like the infrastructure just magically works. I'm divorced, raising my 12-year-old son Jensen, mostly on my own. His mom moved to Seattle 3 years ago for a job that was supposedly temporary. It wasn't. So it's me and him in a 2-bedroom apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina, where I've spent the last 6 years as operations lead at Sentinel Ridge Hosting. We run managed infrastructure for banks, healthcare platforms, e-commerce companies, the kind of businesses where 5 minutes of downtime means 7 figures in losses and a very uncomfortable phone call with lawyers. Every Sunday night, Jensen and I eat Chinese takeout and watch old sci-fi movies. It's our thing. Those Sunday nights are the only hours of the week where my phone stays in the other room. That context matters, because when my boss told me my family eats because of her, she wasn't just insulting me. She was telling me she owned those Sunday nights too. The promotion conversation lasted 10 minutes. I checked my watch when I walked in, and again when I walked out, wondering how a decade of my professional life could be dismissed in less time than it takes to microwave a frozen burrito. Sentinel Ridge had been dangling the infrastructure director title for 2 years. Every quarterly review, same script. "You're doing great work, Ronnie. Leadership is watching. Keep it up and we'll get you there." The corporate equivalent of, "We have food at home." I'd kept it up anyway. Maintained the entire Eastern region's uptime north of 99.99% for 18 consecutive months. Built the incident response playbook that 3 other regions adopted. Personally managed the relationship with Meridian Financial, our largest client, through 2 major platform migrations without a single SLA breach. The numbers told a story anyone could read. Incident resolution time down by roughly a third. Client retention at 97%. 0 regulatory findings in 3 consecutive audits. I had the metrics printed out, tabbed and highlighted, sitting in a folder on my lap like evidence for a trial I naively thought I was going to win. But Gwen, my direct manager and VP of operations, sat across from me with that particular smile. The one that meant bad news was incoming, but she wanted you to thank her for the gentle delivery. Corporate hostage negotiator energy. She explained that the timing wasn't right, that the board wanted someone with more cross-functional visibility for this role, someone who could represent operations at the executive level. Translation: someone who plays golf with the right people and knows which fork to use at client dinners. Someone who looks like leadership rather than does leadership. I pointed out that I interfaced with clients directly every week, that I'd presented incident postmortems to the C-suite 4 times this year, that Meridian's CTO had my personal cell phone and used it. She nodded and explained that leadership presence wasn't just about content, it was about how you show up, the optics, the executive gravitas. She actually used the word gravitas without irony. Optics. Gwen's favorite word. She'd built her entire career on optics, showing up to client meetings in blazers while I was elbow deep in server racks, taking credit for incident resolutions. She couldn't explain if you spotted her the first 3 letters, schmoozing with executives at networking events, while her actual team handled the overnight pages. I'd watched her present my post-incident analysis to the board last quarter, without mentioning my name once. "My team identified the root cause," she'd said, standing in front of slides I'd built, explaining a failure mode I'd diagnosed while she was at a leadership retreat in Asheville, doing whatever those things involve. She suggested I keep doing what I was doing. Let her work on opening doors. 6 months, maybe 9. We'd get there. The hamster wheel extended another rotation. Keep running, keep producing, keep making her look good, and maybe someday you'll get a pellet. I stood up to leave. The conversation was over, and we both knew it. She stopped me at the door, asked me to close it for a second. The polished corporate mask slipped slightly. What I saw underneath was something colder. The look of someone who viewed the people around them not as colleagues, but as inventory to be managed. Assets with unfortunate opinions. She said she wanted to make sure we understood each other, that she knew recruiters had been reaching out, that she knew I thought I had options. Then she reminded me I was a single father who needed stability, health insurance, predictable hours, that a kid in middle school isn't exactly portable, that the job market isn't kind to people who job hop at our age, like we were in the same boat. Like she hadn't just told me I wasn't ready for the promotion she'd gotten 3 years ago. Then the line that changed everything. Your family eats because of me, because I've protected your position here, because I've kept you out of the layoff conversations. A little gratitude and patience would go a long way. I didn't respond, didn't give her the satisfaction. Just nodded once, opened the door, and walked back to my desk. But something shifted in that moment. A wire that had been holding tension for years snapped clean. She'd said the quiet part out loud. She didn't see me as a colleague or even an employee. She saw me as a resource she controlled, a man she could threaten with his own son's well-being and expect gratitude in return. That night, after Jensen went to bed, I updated my resume for the first time in 3 years. Gwen Holloway hadn't always been this way. Or maybe she had, and I'd just been too busy keeping the lights on to notice the ceiling she was constructing above my head. She'd arrived at Sentinel Ridge 4 years ago, recruited from a larger competitor with a resume full of buzzwords. Transformational leader, strategic visionary, passionate about building high-performance teams. The kind of phrases that mean nothing but sound impressive to people who confuse confidence for competence. Her profile picture was professionally lit with perfect hair and a power blazer. Mine was cropped from a family photo at the zoo where Jensen was making bunny ears behind my head. Within 6 months, she'd reorganized the operation structure to put herself at the center of every client communication. Within a year, she'd implemented a visibility protocol requiring all significant updates to route through her before reaching leadership. In practice, nothing I did would reach anyone who mattered unless Gwen forwarded it. And when she forwarded it, my name got scrubbed. Credit went in, attribution came out. Magic. The Meridian financial relationship was the clearest example. I'd inherited that account when their previous vendor had a catastrophic failure, the kind everyone in ops circles heard about for years afterward, the kind that gets whispered as a cautionary tale at conferences and used as a case study in what not to do presentation. Their CTO had been burned badly enough to trust no one. I spent 18 months rebuilding that trust, one incident-free month at a time. Weekly check-ins, transparent reporting, actually answering my phone when she called at weird hours, which apparently was revolutionary in an industry where "we'll get back to you" usually means "we'll get back to you whenever we feel like it." By year 2, the client's CTO called me directly with concerns, bypassed the support line entirely because she knew I'd give her a straight answer instead of corporate spin. She trusted my judgment. She'd told me explicitly that Sentinel Ridge kept their business because of me. Not the company, not the brand. Me. Gwen's response to this? She inserted herself into every Meridian communication, CC'd herself on every email, and started scheduling executive alignment calls that were really just opportunities to take credit for stability I'd built. During the last contract renewal, she presented the relationship as her achievement. I wasn't even invited to the meeting. Andre, our senior systems engineer and the closest thing I had to a friend at Sentinel Ridge, put it perfectly one afternoon. She's not managing operations. She's managing the story of operations. And in her story, she's always the hero saving everyone from disasters that conveniently happened off screen. Andre had been around longer than anyone, a quiet guy in his 50s who'd seen 3 management regimes come and go. He understood the systems better than anyone alive, could diagnose a network issue by the sound the switches made, and understood the politics well enough to keep his head down. He'd started making observations lately, noting how every incident report got edited before going upstairs, how my 17-page root cause analysis became 3 pages after Gwen's review. Funny how problems keep getting smaller the higher up they travel, he said once. Like reverse gravity, except for accountability. Every one of those trimmed sections covered decisions Gwen had made or approved. The firmware update she'd pushed without proper testing because a client complained. The overnight monitoring staff she'd reduced from 3 to 1 because automation could handle it. The cooling maintenance she'd deferred to make quarterly numbers prettier. Every decision created risk. Every time I documented that risk, the documentation disappeared into her editorial process and emerged sanitized, blame-free, and ready for executive consumption. I wasn't just being blocked from promotion. I was being used as a shield. All the risk lived with me. All the credit lived with her. And if anything ever went wrong, I knew exactly whose name would appear on the incident report while hers stayed absent. The Meridian contract renewal was coming up in 2 months, along with a major platform migration requiring perfect execution. Gwen was already positioning herself to lead it, meaning she'd be in the meetings while I did the actual work. Again, I started taking recruiter calls seriously. The offer from Redstone Infrastructure came through on a Tuesday afternoon. Director of Incident Operations. 30% salary increase. Full remote flexibility with quarterly travel to their Denver headquarters. And most importantly, a clause I'd negotiated myself limiting mandatory on-call to 1 weekend per month, with comp time guaranteed for anything beyond that. I'd been interviewing quietly for 2 months, 3 final rounds with different companies, taking PTO for appointments that were actually video calls from my car in various parking lots around Charlotte. The automotive interview circuit. Redstone felt right. A company with actual engineering culture, not just slide decks about engineering culture. Their CTO had been an ops person before leadership, which meant he understood uptime wasn't magic. It was discipline, investment, and treating the people who did the work like professionals instead of resources. Before accepting, I negotiated one more thing. A start date 3 weeks out instead of 2, giving me time to wrap up responsibly and take Jensen camping before the transition. They agreed without pushback. I signed the offer Wednesday evening after Jensen went to bed. Cleared the background check by Friday. Monday morning, written confirmation arrived. All contingencies satisfied. The job was mine. The exit door was open. Monday afternoon, I requested a meeting with Gwen. She looked surprised when I walked in and closed the door. Probably expected another conversation about migration timelines or resource allocation or some other fire that needed my attention. Instead, I placed a single sheet of paper on her desk. This is my 2-week notice. My last day will be the 28th. 3 full seconds of silence. I watched her process it. Confusion. A flicker of what might have been panic. Recalculation. Then the familiar mask sliding back into place. She tried the concerned mentor angle first. Said she knew the promotion news was disappointing, but these things take time. Politics, patience, building relationships. Running away wasn't the answer. Translation. Stay on the hamster wheel. The pellet is coming eventually. I told her I wasn't running. I was making a career decision. She pivoted to guilt. Reminded me I had a son. That stability matters. Asked what happens if this new opportunity doesn't work out. Said the job market isn't exactly friendly to people at our stage of career. Our stage. Like we were peers. Like she hadn't spent 4 years making sure I stayed exactly where I was. Same play as before. Different phrasing. I told her my decision was final. Her expression shifted. She pointed out the Meridian migration was in 6 weeks. That I was the only one who knew their environment at this level. Their systems, their quirks, their people. That leaving now put the entire relationship at risk. The company at risk. I explained the migration plan was documented. The runbooks were complete. Any competent engineer could execute them. She demanded I push my start date. Give 8 weeks instead of 2. Let them hire and train my replacement properly. Then, insisted I be available for questions after leaving. Consultant arrangement. Emergency contact. Whatever it takes. No. The word hung there. I don't think she'd heard it from me in 6 years. I'd always been the yes guy. Yes to the extra project. Yes to the weekend coverage. Yes to the scope creep and unpaid overtime and impossible deadlines. That guy was done. I explained my notice period was 2 weeks, as specified in my employment agreement. I'd complete all standard handover procedures and documentation during that time. After the 28th, I wouldn't be available for Sentinel Ridge business in any capacity. Not consultant calls, not emergency contacts, not quick questions that turn into 4-hour firefights. Nothing. Not negotiable. She smiled coldly. I hope you know what you're doing, Ronnie. Decisions have consequences. The industry is smaller than you think. Yes, they do. For 6 years, I'd been the guy who fixed things before anyone knew they were broken. Early morning alerts resolved before clients woke up. Weekend pages handled without logging overtime because the team needed me. Unofficial changes pushed through because the proper change control process took too long. And Gwen needed results yesterday so she could send leadership a nice update. All of that stopped the day I submitted my notice. I didn't sabotage anything. Didn't delete files or hide documentation or plant any landmines. I simply started following actual policies, the ones written in the official procedures manual that nobody ever read because they expected me to handle exceptions personally. Malicious compliance. Except it wasn't even malicious. It was just compliance. Following the rules everyone agreed to follow, but nobody actually followed because there was always someone like me to clean up the mess quietly. Day 1 of my notice period, a junior engineer messaged me about an Amber Alert on the Meridian backup cluster. Sync lag. Asked if I could just bounce the service like usual. The usual being, I fix it in 5 minutes, nobody logs a ticket, nobody follows procedure, the problem disappears, and everyone pretends the systems run themselves. Old Ronnie would have remoted in, fixed it, and moved on without telling anyone there'd been an issue. New Ronnie replied with instructions to follow the standard incident escalation procedure. Document in service now. Assign to on-call rotation. Follow the runbook. Section 4.3 covers sync lag specifically. The response came back almost immediately, but that takes like 2 hours with all the approvals. You could fix it in 5 minutes. My reply: the procedure exists for a reason. Following it ensures proper documentation and knowledge transfer. I won't always be here to bounce services. Translation: not my circus anymore. Time to learn to juggle. Watching people realize they'd have to actually use the processes I'd written was darkly fascinating. They went through the usual denial to acceptance arc and finally started reading the runbooks. Turns out, those processes worked fine. They were just slow, bureaucratic, and exactly as thorough as they needed to be for a regulated industry where audit trails matter. By day 3, Gwen scheduled an all-hands operations sync, corporate for emergency meeting because everything's on fire, and I need someone to yell at. She threw scary graphs on the screen showing resolution times up 40%, customer satisfaction trending yellow, and something called operational velocity that I'm pretty sure she made up. It sounded bad, which was the point. She demanded to know what was happening. Why were things taking so long? Where was the sense of urgency? The room sat in uncomfortable silence. Junior engineers looked at each other like students hoping someone else would answer the teacher's question. Someone coughed. This was the moment where old Ronnie would have spoken up, offered to coordinate a solution. New Ronnie sat there with his hands folded, waiting. I explained in my most helpful voice that we were following documented change control procedures, per her memo from last October about process adherence and audit compliance. The one she'd sent after external auditors flagged our change management as a risk area. The one she'd made everyone sign acknowledging they'd read and understood. Her jaw tightened. That memo had been performative, a gesture she'd assumed nobody would actually enforce because I'd always handled things quietly. A checkbox exercise, CYA documentation, not something people were supposed to actually do. She suggested there was room for professional judgment in applying procedures, that we didn't need to be rigid about routine issues, that experienced team members should know when to expedite. I agreed completely, nodded, then noted that with the Meridian migration approaching, it seemed important to ensure all changes were properly documented and approved for audit trail purposes. Wouldn't want another finding, especially not right before a major client engagement. Checkmate via her own policy. She couldn't argue without contradicting herself in front of the entire team. The meeting ended with nothing resolved and everyone confused about what they were supposed to do now. Death by process. Exactly as designed. That afternoon, I left at 5 o'clock sharp. First time in years that I hadn't stayed just to wrap up a few things. Jensen had a basketball game at 6:30, and I was going to be there for the whole thing instead of watching the fourth quarter from the parking lot while handling emails on my phone. He spotted me in the stands during warm-ups and literally stopped dribbling. The ball bounced away while he stared, grinned, got yelled at by his coach for losing focus. After the game, they won by 6, and he had 8 points, including a three-pointer in the fourth quarter. We got burgers at his favorite place. He asked why I wasn't checking my phone, why I hadn't looked at it once since we sat down. I told him about the new job. Director role. Better pay. Mostly remote. We weren't moving. Same apartment, same school, same everything. Except I'd actually be around for dinner. And games. And Sunday movies that didn't get interrupted by emergency pages. He thought about it for a second, then said the other thing wasn't working, for either of us. The incident hit at 2:40 a.m. on day 9 of my notice period. I woke up to 43 notifications and a voicemail from Andre that consisted of 2 words. It's bad. My phone still had the old alert routing from when I used to cover extra rotations. I'd never bothered to remove myself from the escalation chains until now. One more thing on the handover list that suddenly seemed less urgent. Meridian Financial's primary database cluster had crashed. Not a graceful failover to backup systems. Not a controlled maintenance window with customer notification. A hard crash with data corruption during overnight batch processing. The kind of failure that makes auditors ask uncomfortable questions and lawyers start drafting demand letters. Their SLA guaranteed 99.99% uptime for critical systems, with financial penalties that escalated by the hour. Every minute of unplanned downtime cost them roughly $15,000 in direct losses, plus whatever regulatory penalties would follow from missed processing windows. By the time the sun came up, they'd been down 4 hours, $6 million in exposure and counting, with the meter still running and no clear resolution in sight. I could hear the panic in the escalation emails even from here, watching the notifications pile up on my phone like a slow-motion disaster. I wasn't on call, wasn't even supposed to be involved. But Andre called me anyway, And I picked up because old habits die hard, and because I wanted to know what happened to systems I'd protected for 6 years. He explained the situation in his usual deadpan. The crash was caused by a storage firmware update, one that wasn't on the approved change calendar. The change request showed a junior engineer's name as implementer, but Gwen had pressured him to push it Friday night because the client CTO had mentioned query performance during a business review. Gwen wanted it fixed before Monday so she could send a proactive communication about how responsive Sentinel Ridge was to client concerns. Told him to skip the staging environment testing because we don't have time for the full process on something this routine. Classic Gwen. Quick wins that looked good in the moment and exploded catastrophically later. Maximum visibility, minimum diligence. The firmware equivalent of "I'm sure it'll be fine," followed by "How could anyone have predicted this?" The answer, of course, was that everyone who knew anything about change management could have predicted this. That's why change management exists. I'd blocked dozens of similar requests over the years by insisting on proper testing and change windows. The conversations were always the same. Gwen would frame urgency as client centricity. I'd explain why shortcuts create bigger problems than they solve. She'd sigh dramatically about how ops people don't understand the business, and I'd hold the line anyway. Without me running interference, nobody was left willing to tell her no. Nobody wanted to be the person who slowed things down or didn't understand the urgency or wasn't a team player. So they did what she asked, and now $6 million was on fire. Andre had documentation. The email chain between Gwen and the junior engineer was damning in its clarity. She hadn't put instructions in writing directly. She was too politically savvy for that, but his replies referenced her verbal instructions with the precision of someone who knew he might need cover later. Smart kid. Per our call, you want me to push the firmware tonight and skip staging validation. Just confirming in writing before I proceed. Her response, 3 minutes later. Correct. The client is breathing down my neck and I need this resolved before Monday. Get it done. Plus the change request noted expedited per VP approval with her initials, and the change control system logged exactly who approved the staging bypass. Digital breadcrumbs leading straight to her door. I told him to save everything. Screenshot it, export it to the compliance case folder, flag it for legal hold. Don't let anyone modify those records. The formal incident review was scheduled for Thursday. Standard practice for any outage exceeding SLA thresholds. A structured postmortem where we'd walk through timeline, identify root causes, and document corrective action. Usually, Gwen would facilitate these reviews, which meant controlling the narrative and ensuring the final report said whatever she needed it to say. The problems got smaller. The accountability disappeared. The lessons learned were always about process improvements that someone else would implement. But this time, there was a new variable. The outage had triggered Meridian's breach notification requirements, which meant their compliance team was demanding an independent review with full documentation. They'd insisted on including their own technical lead in the meeting, Marisol Vega, a senior systems architect I'd worked with during both previous platform migrations. Marisol didn't play politics. She played facts, had a reputation for being relentless about root cause analysis, the kind of engineer who would follow a problem through 17 layers of corporate obfuscation until she found the actual answer. She once told me her job was to find what broke and why, and corporate feelings weren't her concern. And she had access to logs that Gwen couldn't edit. I spent the days before the review compiling documentation. Every email where Gwen had pushed for expedited changes. Every instance where proper testing had been skipped at her direction or with her approval. Every sanitized report where risk factors got edited out before reaching leadership. Clean timeline. Supporting evidence. All factual, all verifiable, zero commentary or interpretation. I wasn't planning to sabotage anyone. I was just planning to tell the truth when asked. The incident review took place in the main conference room on the executive floor, the one with the good chairs and the view of the parking garage. Present, Gwen, myself, Andre, our CTO, Marisol from Meridian, and an HR representative I'd never seen at a technical meeting in 6 years of working there. HR representatives don't attend postmortems unless someone's about to become post-employed. Her presence told me everything about what leadership expected to happen in this room. This wasn't just a postmortem. This was a tribunal with better lighting. Gwen tried controlling the narrative from the opening minute. She'd prepared. Hair perfect, blazer crisp, confident smile firmly in place. Thanked everyone for being there during a challenging week. Acknowledged we'd fallen short of our commitments. Said she took full responsibility for ensuring we do better going forward. Yeah, taking responsibility for improvement is not the same as accepting responsibility for failure. It's the rhetorical equivalent of a magician's misdirection. Watch this hand, not that one. Then she suggested we focus on constructive root cause analysis, rather than assigning blame. Translation: let's make sure blame lands somewhere else. She asked me to walk through the technical timeline. Gracious of her to let me present the facts that would end her career. I'd prepared 8 slides, timestamps, log excerpts, email threads, facts arranged in chronological order, sourced to specific documentation. Just reality with receipts. I explained the incident began at 2:40 a.m. when the primary database cluster experienced a corruption event during scheduled batch processing. Root cause was a storage firmware update that introduced a compatibility issue with our database versioning. The firmware documentation explicitly required staging environment validation before production deployment. The update went to production at 11:34 p.m. the previous Friday. Without staging validation, I showed the change request screenshot. Submitted 9:45 p.m. Friday, approved 9:50 p.m. 5 minutes from request to approval for a firmware change on production database systems. Standard change control requires a 72-hour review window plus mandatory staging validation. Both requirements were waived. The waiver notation read, expedited per VP approval, DH. Gwen shifted in her seat but kept her expression neutral. Explained it was a judgment call based on client urgency. Meridian had flagged performance concerns that needed prompt attention. Sometimes you have to balance process with responsiveness. Can't let bureaucracy get in the way of client service. Marisol spoke for the first time. Voice calm, precise. The voice of someone who'd sat through 100 of these meetings and had exactly 0 patience for corporate spin. What performance concerns specifically? I reviewed our support ticket history this morning. There's no escalation from our team requesting emergency firmware intervention. No severity 1 ticket. No documented urgency. Gwen explained it came up in conversation during the quarterly business review. The client CTO had mentioned some query latency that was concerning her team. Informal feedback. The kind of thing that doesn't always make it into formal channels. Did she specifically request that firmware be updated without staging validation? Gwen's smile tightened. She explained she'd expressed urgency about resolution. She made a leadership decision to prioritize client satisfaction and competitive responsiveness. Sometimes you have to take initiative. I advanced to the next slide. The email thread, with key passages highlighted. I read the relevant exchange. The junior engineer's email at 9:15 p.m. Friday. Per our call, you want me to push the firmware update tonight and skip staging validation. Just confirming instructions in writing before I proceed. Gwen's response at 9:18 p.m. Correct. The client is breathing down my neck, and I need this resolved before Monday. Get it done. Silence settled over the room like a physical weight. Gwen claimed she was paraphrasing client pressure, not overriding safety procedures. The engineer had the authority to push back if he had concerns. He could have said no. Our CTO leaned forward, noted the email seemed fairly explicit, asked if there was another interpretation he was missing. Gwen said context matters. She was communicating urgency, not overriding change control. Experienced professionals should understand nuance. Andre cleared his throat. He'd been watching with his usual detachment, but something in his posture had shifted. He leaned forward slightly. The change control audit log shows Gwen's credentials approved the expedited timeline and staging bypass. Not the engineer's supervisor, not the change control board as required for production database systems. Gwen directly using VP override authority. The timestamp is 9:50 p.m. Friday, 5 minutes after the request was submitted. The HR rep's pen was moving across her legal pad with intense focus, transcribing testimony, building a record. Gwen insisted VP override authority existed for exactly these circumstances. That's why the authority existed in the first place. It was part of her role. The ability to make judgment calls when the situation required. I pulled up the policy screenshot. Noted that firmware changes to production database systems require change control board approval regardless of urgency level. Per policy OPS 147, section 4.2. VP override authority explicitly excludes changes to critical data systems handling financial transactions. The policy document showed her electronic signature at the bottom. She'd signed off on it herself during last year's annual compliance review. Marisol added that Meridian's contract includes specific language about change control procedures for systems handling financial data. Bypassing documented procedures may constitute material breach. Their legal team was reviewing implications. Gwen pivoted to me, said I'd been disengaged for 2 weeks, refused to help with routine issues, unavailable for questions from junior team members. Now presenting all this like a prosecution instead of a collaborative review. Maybe if I'd been more supportive, this situation wouldn't have happened. I explained I'd followed documented procedures during my notice period, as required by company policy for transitioning employees, Every issue handled according to the established escalation matrix. This incident occurred because documented procedures were bypassed at her explicit written instruction, an instruction I wasn't consulted about and didn't approve. She stood up. Chair scraped the floor. I don't have to sit here and be attacked by someone who's already checked out. Our CTO held up a hand, called for a break, asked Gwen and the HR rep to join him in his office. Marisol caught my eye as we filed out. The faintest nod. Professional acknowledgement between people who value facts over narratives. The rest of my notice period passed quietly. Gwen was working remotely on strategic initiatives for the remainder of the week, meaning she was negotiating her exit, being investigated by legal, or both. Her office light stayed dark. On day 11 of my notice, I was in the break room getting coffee when I heard the elevator ding. I looked up and watched Gwen walk out, followed by an HR rep and a security officer. She was carrying a cardboard box. The sad, standard issue kind they keep in supply closets for exactly this purpose. A few picture frames visible on top. Her badge hung from a lanyard around her neck, but the way the security officer walked slightly behind her told me it had already been deactivated. Just decoration now. She didn't look around, didn't make eye contact with anyone, just walked straight toward the lobby doors, the HR rep maintaining that practiced neutral expression. The security officer wasn't aggressive, just present. The whole thing took maybe 45 seconds. Quiet. Professional. 1 minute she was VP of operations, the next she was someone who used to work here, walking toward her car in the parking garage. Someone near the window whispered, "Finally," under their breath. I didn't disagree. Our CTO called me into his office on my second to last day to confirm what the grapevine had already established. Gwen was gone. Effective immediately. The official internal announcement would describe it as a mutual decision to pursue new opportunities. The reality. Legal reviewed the email chains, HR reviewed the policy violations, and Meridian made it clear they needed documented governance improvements and leadership changes in the operations organization if the relationship was going to continue. He said they were aware of how badly they'd handled my situation, the promotion, the visibility issue, the way credit got redistributed upward while risk got pushed downward, all of it. If I'd consider staying, we could discuss the director role, different reporting structure, compensation that actually reflected my value, real authority this time, not just responsibility. He meant it. I could tell from the desperation in his voice. Everything I'd wanted 2 months ago. Now it felt like being offered a window seat on a plane that had already crashed into the mountain. I told him I appreciated that, genuinely, but I'd made commitments. He nodded, said he figured, that I'd been right about everything. He should have seen it sooner. I told him he saw what Gwen wanted him to see. That was her specialty. On my last day, I finished the handover documentation. Almost 90 pages of procedures, contacts, troubleshooting guides, and institutional knowledge that would take my replacement months to fully absorb, assuming they bothered to read it and didn't just ping me on LinkedIn asking quick question. I sent it to Andre with a note. Don't let them pressure you into shortcuts. The procedures exist for a reason. His reply came back within minutes, staying exactly long enough to collect full pension. Then fly fishing shop in Montana. You should visit. Bring the kid. I stopped by the junior engineer's desk on my way out, the one Gwen had pressured into pushing the firmware update. He looked shell-shocked. Fair, given he'd spent the past week being interviewed by legal about emails he'd never wanted to write and decisions he'd been pressured into making. He apologized, said he should have pushed back harder, that he knew it felt wrong when he did it. I told him he was a junior engineer doing what his VP explicitly instructed in writing, not on him. Blame flows upward, not downward, at least in any organization that deserves to exist. But next time someone with authority asks him to skip a safety procedure, get it in writing, then think carefully about pressing enter. His career will last longer than their urgency. Badge returned. Equipment signed off. NDA reminder acknowledged. Standard exit procedures complete. I walked out of Sentinel Ridge on a Friday afternoon. No fanfare, no goodbye party, no tearful farewells. Just me in a cardboard box, stepping into a humid Charlotte afternoon that smelled like summer rain. Jensen was on the couch when I got home. Basketball highlights on TV. Last day? Yup, last day. How do you feel? I thought about it honestly. The years of early mornings and late nights, and missed dinners and weekend emergencies. Gwen's cold smile, and her comment about my family eating because of her. All the credit stolen and blame deflected, and risk absorbed by people who deserved better. Watching her walk out with that sad little box? Good. Really good. We still doing Chinese and Terminator 2 on Sunday? Wouldn't miss it. Monday, I started at Redstone. New badge, new laptop, new Slack workspace full of new people. First meeting with their CTO covered incident response philosophy and team expectations. He explained their approach was simple. Document everything. Test everything. Never let anyone pressure you into shortcuts because they're in a hurry. The right way is the only way, even when the right way takes longer. Especially when the right way takes longer. I smiled. Said I could work with that. My phone stayed quiet all morning. No pages, no panicked texts, no urgent escalations from people needing me to save them from decisions they shouldn't have made. Just the normal rhythm of a job that respected boundaries and understood that uptime wasn't about heroes. It was about systems that worked, because people followed the process, because they invested in redundancy and testing and change control, because they treated stability as a feature, not an afterthought. 2 weeks later, Andre texted me a screenshot. Company-wide email announcing organizational updates in the operations division. Gwen's name appeared exactly once, buried in the third paragraph. We thank Gwen Holloway for her contributions and wish her well in future endeavors. The rest was corporate boilerplate about continued commitment to operational excellence and strengthening our leadership team and exciting opportunities ahead. Andre's commentary, 3 sentences, after 4 years. The official record of her entire tenure. Almost poetic, really. I laughed, closed the message, and went back to work. Some people never learn, but that wasn't my problem anymore. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.